In this video, we'll be taking a look at the 2015 MacBook Air and how it holds up in 2023. So I've owned my 2015 MacBook Air for around a year now, and I did make a video on it last year, but I didn't have as much experience with it. But now with a year of using it and getting to know it pretty well, I've found out a lot about this laptop and what its shortcomings are and what it excels in. But before we get into how it holds up in 2023, let's first cover what this machine offers. So the 2015 MacBook Air has the most common MacBook Air design you'll see. It was produced for close to 10 years and yeah, it's a very common design. And that's because it worked. It was a slim laptop that was very light but also extremely durable at the same time and felt really premium, made fully out of aluminium, unlike a lot of other slim laptops that were out at its time, which were mostly plastic with a bit of metal. Now this laptop came in a few different variations. You could either get it in an 11.6 inch screen size or a 13 inch screen size, and I of course am using the 13 inch screen size. You can also get it in an i5 or an i7. Now the 2015 version with the i5, which is what I have, was clocked at only 1.6 gigahertz and was dual core, so it wasn't a very powerful laptop. But the CPU on this laptop is definitely not the part that actually bottlenecks it. That is the RAM. On mine, it only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, which is a big mistake to buy one with only 4 gigs of RAM, because it really struggles with having more than one application open at the same time, which is quite annoying. But these laptops did come in 8 and even 16 gigabytes of RAM if you were willing to spend a bit more money. And they also came in several storage options. Mine has 128 gigabytes, which is the base storage, but it also came in 256 or 512 gigabytes. So those are the basic specs you've got on this laptop. On the inside, it's got a big battery, which allows it to last for quite a while, several hours on a charge. But of course, since the 2015 is already a fair bit older, it does mean the battery does suffer a bit just from the age and being used. And also on the inside it has one small fan, and that's all this CPU needs, including the i7. The i7 would probably run a little hotter, but on the i5 it runs really cool and you barely ever hear the fan turn on. So that's really nice. It's also nice that it doesn't get too hot on the bottom of the laptop, so you can comfortably have it on your lap using it for several hours. So let's get into some of the external things and just some of the usability things on this laptop. So let's start off with the ports. You've got yourself a few USB Type A's, and that's nice to see. I like USB Type A's personally, but nowadays most people use USB Type C. It's also got a Thunderbolt 2.0 port and a headphone jack, as well as the MagSafe connector, which is really nice. The screen on this laptop is also not too bad. It's not the Retina screen that came on later models, but it is a pretty good screen with good viewing angles and nice colors. The only downside of the screen is the lower resolution, which is in between 720p and 1080p. Although around the screen, it does have some pretty large bezels in 2023, but that's just one of the things that comes with this laptop being quite old. The keyboard and trackpad on this laptop are really good and definitely the highlights of this laptop. The keyboard has a nice travel to it and just feels pretty nice to type on. It's not exceptional, but it's definitely not a bad keyboard. The trackpad though is really where this laptop excels. It's got a nice glass surface that is really nice to move your finger on. It just feels so smooth. And even though the trackpad isn't that big compared to newer MacBooks, I never had the feeling that I needed a bigger trackpad when using it. Now let's talk about how it holds up in 2023 and if you should purchase one of these. I personally got mine for 300 Australian dollars, which was a decent deal, although I was meant to actually get one with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage, but when it came in the mail, it turned out it was just the base model with only 4 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage, which was quite disappointing. Now I did talk to the seller on eBay, and eventually I just decided to keep the laptop because it would have been a bit of a hassle to send it back. But one of these laptops with 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of storage, or even 256, will usually sell for around 300 Australian dollars, so that would be your average going rate, sometimes a bit more, but usually not any less than that. And for that price, you do get a pretty good laptop to use. It's quite smooth and runs applications quite well. Of course, with mine, with only 4 gigabytes of RAM, it is a bit of a struggle, but with 8 gigabytes of RAM, I have tried one before and it felt a lot better. Now, macOS, as you know, is a very smooth running operating system and is very well optimized as well. And if you're used to macOS, a MacBook Air is a really good option for a good MacBook that is solid and won't break the bank. These MacBooks are perfect for someone looking for a laptop for school and they want macOS as their operating system. And even if you're not particularly familiar with macOS, this is still a really good school laptop because macOS is very simple and easy to learn, and it's one of the more durable laptops you're going to find for that $300 Australian price tag. So in 2023, this laptop is really good for someone who wants to use it at school, or just someone who is going to use this laptop for like web browsing and just some basic tasks. This laptop still does a really good job. This laptop doesn't do that well when it comes to video editing because it's got a really underpowered CPU. Anything that has to do with rendering, this laptop will struggle. But that doesn't mean it can't be done, it's just going to be extremely slow. Like I've tried editing videos on Adobe Premiere Pro on this laptop, but it wasn't terribly unsmooth. It was only when it came down to the rendering, it took a really long time. One thing I haven't mentioned throughout this whole video is the topic of software and updates. Since this MacBook is from 2015, it's now 8 years old, which means Apple will stop supporting it with its latest software. It will still continue giving security updates, but it just means that you won't be able to have the latest feature updates, which can be a pretty big downside for a lot of people. It also means over the next few years, this laptop will really become outdated and will slowly start losing support for programs that Mac uses. Also, another point to consider is that the software experience you have now is the one you will have for the rest of the life of this laptop, since it will not get any more feature updates. While security updates are nice, and it is nice that Apple does support security updates for longer, it means that if you have any bugs or anything in the software, with the lack of feature updates, it means those bugs will most likely stay. And that's one of the big downsides to macOS. They have a limited life. While with Windows on the other hand, you can basically use it for as long as the computer or laptop lasts. So if you are looking to pick up one of these laptops, what's my recommendation on which model to get? My recommendation would be, if you really want a 2015 model, then I would go for 8GB of RAM with the i5 and 256GB of storage. But if you do have a bit more in your budget, I would recommend going for a 2017 model, since that does give you 2 years of headroom in software updates. It also allows you to have a faster processor in there as well. But if you can pick up a 2015 with 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage for around that $300 Australian price tag, you've got yourself a really good deal there. But those are just some things to keep in mind with this laptop. But if you are looking for a good budget school laptop or something that'll be really good and reliable for many years, whatever your application may be, this laptop is a really good option. And hopefully this video did help you out if you were considering picking one of these up. So with all that out of the way, I'll see you guys in the next video.